Joe. Thank you very much. We're good.
247. I wanted to, try it with a little more mellow, try a little mellow feel on it.
Okay, Steve, that's a good level for that.
Usually it's the best part of the whole song for me, We're starting.
Here we go, guys.
Come on.
We're rolling.
I remember that night. Another icy February in Chicago. It was well below freezing, and there was a lot more snow on the ground than there is now.
Waiting for hours and yet you have no time. You're running late and me out of my mind, and I said, hey.
His mob boss wanted to have dinner with him. He knew it was a trap, but he went anyway, knowing he had no other choice. He really didn't. There were no places he could run where they couldn't find him.
What are intentions? The facts they are not clear. The situation is you're clearly not here, and I said, hey, hey, hey.
I remember him saying to me, my chances of surviving were pretty slim that night. But nevertheless, on that frigid February night, he chose to meet what he thought was his certain death.
Hey, hey, hey.
When they shot me, I could hear bang, clunk, bang, clunk, maybe three. And I was saying, what the hell is it? I am dying. I'm coming to me. Just like, what the hell is this shit?
Ken Eto, Joe Eto, Tokyo Joe Eto. Those were the names that I recall. There was only one other woman that was working organized crime at the time, and I'd always been fascinated with organized crime in Chicago. And I took the supervisor of one of the organized crime squads out to breakfast and asked him and said I wanted to come and work organized crime. And he said that he would present it to the squad to see if they would vote to have another woman on the squad. And apparently they voted okay. So I was transferred off of bank fraud, which I was working at the time. It was considered a nothing case because they knew that he was Japanese. They knew that he would never be a MAID member. It was sort of they knew his association with the mob, but it wasn't like one of the bosses or any big deal mafioso. But Eto had a reputation of being a killer. So it might have been, in the hierarchy of what the Bureau thought at the time, a small case. To me, it wasn't. In the 1930s, organized gangs crossed the United States, committing crimes that generated vast sums of money and left a trail of blood behind them. When Machine Gun Kelly ran wild, murder and bank robberies were rampant. During World War II and into the Cold War, foreign agents schemed to steal the United States military and technological advances, including the atomic bomb. But as J. Edgar Hoover consolidated his control over the Federal Bureau of Investigation and every president that he served under, he made the FBI into the most powerful crime-fighting organization in the world.
There are three needs in America today in law enforcement: the elimination of politics from law enforcement, emphasis on efficiency, and cooperation between police agencies. We should all be concerned with but one goal: the eradication of crime.
The Mafia had been extending its stranglehold of the rackets since the days of Prohibition. Now it ruled many of America's largest cities. Chicago was no exception. In the 1970s, mob boss Tony Accardo, the Big Tuna, reigned supreme. His field bosses were Jackie Cerrone and Joey Aiuppa. Murderers, such as Joe Ferriola, Joey Lombardo, and Vince Solano, had their own territories in which they managed their crews and oversaw the millions earned by their illegal activities. Vince Solano's crew worked the north side. In his crew was one guy that terrified everyone. This man was Ken Eto. He was the man who became my target. He had been arrested a few times for minor gambling busts by the Chicago police, but had been untouched by the FBI.
Investigators have described the 62-year-old Eto as the highest-ranking Oriental member of the Chicago mob. Eto was indicted earlier this month by a Cook County grand jury on a syndicated gambling charge. Their attorney, veteran criminal lawyer Sam Banks, predicted his clients would be vindicated.
We've looked at the indictment. We feel that both defendants are not guilty. We feel we'll prevail in court.
But Eto, known in some Rush Street circles as Tokyo Joe, had nothing to say as he left the criminal court's building.
Nothing? You have nothing at all to say about it? You don't think that it's... Sam do the talking for you, okay. All right.
I'm Ken's brother, younger brother. I don't think I was ever judgmental about him. I saw him as a more expansive person that lived outside of normal bounds, you know, and was very successful at it.
The FBI has this very unique system that they, if your name is ever mentioned in something, it's called indexed. His name had been indexed to 50 files, and then I think I subpoenaed his phone records. And with the research, what the research told me, I pulled his arrest report, and his phone records. That started me, and then I went out on the street to find him, where he lived, what car did he drive, what did he look like in person. Seemed to be kind of a scary guy. He seemed to, you know, this gambling kingpin, cold-blooded sort of killer. And my impression was that he was kind of a piece of trash, and a kind of a frightening piece of trash. He was born in 1919. Ken Eto, Joe Montana, Joe the Jap. Whatever name they called him, his reputation was ruthless. He was a wise business negotiator and one of the craftiest of card sharks. And then out of the blue, this informant contacted the FBI and he said, I can get you Ken Eto. And so then I developed this informant. So we were able to, through the informant, dictate where his tabulating room was going to be. He did it, and he rented one room, room 127, and then he rented the room adjoining. And so we were outside in a van. The two rooms that were adjoining for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, so that we always had them, and then we bugged. And then the second and third week, we bugged the motel room. Let's say at the time, and I did a wiretap in 1981, 15 wiretaps the entire year of 1981 across the United States. Wiretaps were almost impossible to get through the Department of Justice. And so with working with DEA and myself, we were able to do the wiretap on this guy. What is going on between 1980 and 1983 is that now I have joined hands with the Drug Enforcement Administration, and we have now started to make real inroads into Sam Sarcinelli, Larry Brady drug dealing, and we're getting real evidence that Eto was being financed by this drug operation. And he was making so much money in drugs that he needed a way to launder it. So he decided, he teamed up with some Genovese family people in New York and started coming out with stock issues, penny stock issues, that he could invest money, his drug money, under names, fictitious names. Although even on the wiretap, even the baddest of the baddest drug dealers were scared shitless of Eto. On August 20th, 1980, when we saw Joe drive into the lot, come in, we let him in the tabulating room for maybe 10 minutes, and then it was knock, 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 FBI, we have a search warrant, and then we didn't really even wait for them to open the door. They broke the door in. These doors actually pop open quite easily. Guys did it with their shoulders. Walter Mikas was sitting on the bed. I think Joe was sitting at the table with an adding machine, and he was going through the slips and adding things up. He was a poker face. There was no reading through what had happened. Now remember, this is the first time Eto's been arrested by the feds. When you're arrested by the feds, it's serious. We win 99% of our cases. He was going down. He knew that. My serve! My husband, Tom, had been my high school boyfriend. A natural athlete, when he became an FBI agent, he was chosen to train other agents in firearms and defensive tactics. During one such training, he was accidentally shot. It was a miracle he lived. 2 years before his shooting, at Tom's urging, I had left teaching to enter the FBI training academy. It was a very uncomfortable environment for me. I was 34 years old, a mother, a wife, and all of a sudden I'm on a Marine base camp in Quantico, Virginia. Now, the FBI Academy isn't in Marine barracks, But to go back and sleep on like a single bed with an army blanket. I remember being in training school and memorizing the trajectory, how fast bullets go from each of these weapons and stuff, and polishing my nails. It didn't seem weird. It just didn't seem unusual. They never really frightened me. What seemed unusual about the guns was the guys taking their pants off or their belts. That bothered me more, I think, than guns. No.
Okay, bring it around to the right.
Wrestling and doing the choker hold on people and cuffing them, and then we'd go out to firearm. Handguns, shotguns, rifles, M16s. Those were the guns we qualified on over and over. Then you had to, climb up a rope, ring a bell at the top, climb back down, run down a field with a shotgun on your back. I mean, it was 16 weeks of very strenuous sort of indoctrination, but also learning, most of all, arresting people techniques and your guns. Intellectually, I don't think I learned that much. When I was at Quantico, it was the hand weapon, the revolver. I trained on the rifle, whichever one was being used in the 70s. I trained on the shotgun. I trained on the M16. While I was an agent, I trained on the MP5. And so, in 1979, I, Elaine Corbett-Smith, was sworn in as an FBI agent, one of the few female agents at the time. I worked hard to build my case against Ken Eto, charging him with running an interstate gambling enterprise and racketeering. At the time, he was out on bond, waiting for his trial. February 10th, 1983. My husband had just gotten out of the hospital, and our friends invited us to go to Colorado. They had a condominium, and so we decided that we needed a vacation, and so we were sleeping. And the phone rang, and my friend answered it and said it was the office, and it was Bill Brown. And he said, Ken Eto has just been shot in the head. My God, why? Why would they shoot him? He's nobody. Those were my thoughts, really. And he's alive. And I think he intimated that he was doing okay. But he said, can you think of who might have shot him? And I thought to myself, what do you think, I'm clairvoyant? Well, it's got to be somebody on the crew. And so I named Campisi, I think, or yeah. And he said, oh, I got to go now, and so he hung up.
The shooting took place in this parking lot behind the Montclair Theater. Eto was sitting in his car with two men when one of them allegedly pulled a .22 caliber handgun and shot Eto 3 times in the head. But he did not die, and instead stumbled from his car through the parking lot, leaving a trail of blood before walking into the terminal pharmacy.
I believe that this probably was all taken up by the pharmacy, the whole thing. And that's when he goes into Maury, the pharmacist, and says, I've been shot. Can you get me some help?
I just asked him what was wrong, and he didn't say anything. And I said, what happened to you? And he said he was shot. I said there weren't any doctors here. He asked me to call him an ambulance. I called him an ambulance. That's it.
Eto is listed in critical but stable condition at Northwest Hospital's intensive care unit under protective police custody.
He's afraid that the police are going to finish him off because at this point, Hanhart William Hanhart was chief of detectives, and he was in the pocket of organized crime. And he thought a cop was going to come in the ambulance and then finish him off. So he asked them to close the ambulance doors and to have this rookie cop, which was one of the first ones on the scene, to sit with him until he got to the hospital. And when he got to the hospital, the only person that he knew was me, because I had done the gambling case against him, and I had kept bothering him to flip. And he said, "I'm property of the FBI, I want to see Elaine Smith." And the cop said, "Who the fuck is Elaine Smith?" I mean, it was like a joke.
A lot of the people that were in the hierarchy, the bosses of organized crime at that time, felt that he, Mr. Eto, would talk and cooperate with the police rather than do time in prison. They then began to figure he was what they call expendable. They could not risk Ken Eto facing a lengthy prison term. They thought if he gets convicted, he will cooperate with the government. He will send people like Vince Solano, Joe Arnold, and Joe DeVarco to jail. And so the organized crime chieftains felt they couldn't risk the fact that Eto would be a stand-up guy. They tried to kill him. They shot him 3 times at close range, left him for dead, and he survived. That's unprecedented in Chicago. We could not recall a case where mobsters set out to kill an informant or a man or a victim, whoever it was, and he survived.
The FBI asked Jeremy Margolis, an assistant United States attorney, to come to the hospital to try and convince Eto to cooperate.
I met him late one evening at the Northwest Community Hospital in the emergency room, shortly after he had been brought there by the Chicago police in an ambulance. Don't recall the date. It was a Thursday night about 25 years ago at about 12:30 in the morning. I was radioed by the FBI and asked to come to the hospital because Ken had been shot in the head but had survived, and the FBI wanted me to attempt to interview him and arrange for his cooperation with the federal government. The mission was to convince him within hours to become a cooperating government witness, to accept our protection, and to identify the gunmen who tried to kill him before they themselves were killed.
And several hours later, Bob Walsh, who was my supervisor at the time, called me and he said, "He's cooperating." I realized it was a great gift that we had gotten. I mean, it was a windfall of information. It was spectacular. It was the first person to survive a mob murder or attempted murder. It was absolutely the best news you could get. That here I had a case. I had the subject who had survived an attempted hit. He was cooperating with the FBI. I assumed and I knew he was going to tell us some really good inside information. I didn't realize how extensive it would be and how close to the leaders of the mob it was going to be.
I convinced him that his duties and obligations to the mob had been breached by the mob. He knew that he had no intention whatsoever of cooperating with the government. And their efforts to kill him were simply wrong. They breached their duty to him. So there was no more obligation on his part because the deal was over. We then talked for, as I recall now, maybe an hour, hour and a half alone. And my main point was to convince Ken that the obligations that he previously felt, his oath which he previously had lived by, were no longer valid because of their betrayal and their efforts to kill him without any justification whatsoever. I tried to let him identify with me, and I described my family's interest in the Japanese martial arts. And we talked about the martial arts, and we talked about the code of Bushido, and I made him understand that I had some better understanding than a typical American of the obligation that he felt and how seriously he held that obligation. And I hoped that by getting him to understand that I knew a little bit more about Japanese thinking and Japanese loyalty than a typical American, that maybe I would have more impact in my argument, that his obligation and his oath and his loyalty no longer existed. The second thing I tried to make him understand was that time was of the essence. We had a very small window. The people who tried to kill him were themselves going to be killed as soon as the boss, Vince Solano, the man who had ordered Ken's murder, learned that the murder attempt had been botched. So I said, you eventually have to cooperate with us and be our witness, because they've tried to kill you once, they'll try to kill you again, they need you dead. But if you give me the names of the shooters before word of your survival gets out, we can get the shooters, arrest them, and maybe get them to give us Vince Solano. Maybe we can make it right. Maybe we can get Solano for trying to kill you. But we only have a few hours for you to make your decision. And after a period of time, although he was in pain and the concussion made it difficult for him to hear, I was shouting most of the time, he understood that what I was saying was true. I didn't convince him. He's not a man who's going to be fooled or convinced. I gave him facts which he could analyze and make his own rational decision. And he then wasn't convinced by me. He ultimately agreed with me that he would have to become a federal witness in order to survive. If he wanted to do justice to Vince Solano, who tried to kill him, he would have to identify the shooters before they themselves were killed, so maybe they could give us Solano. And he agreed and shook my hand and agreed to provide us with their names and agreed to come into the witness protection program and accept our protection for him and his family if they choose to be relocated with him. And then he stopped and he hesitated. And he thought about it again, and he said, how can I be sure that I can trust you? He was having second thoughts. He is a man who spent his entire adult life working for the mob, not the code of Bushido, but the code of Omerta. He took an oath. He promised his bosses silence, to never reveal mob secrets, and it was a very emotional moment. I mean, he had just narrowly escaped being murdered, and now he was about to turn his back on, decades and decades of what he felt was a solemn obligation to his mob bosses. It was a very difficult time. And he had second thoughts, which came as no surprise. So I reached into my pocket and I took out my credentials, and on the outside of the credential case was my gold badge. And by now I'd been in his bed with him, and I was not covered, but I had his blood on my hands, on my clothes, because the wounds kept seeping from his head bandage. And I took his hand, and I put his hand on my badge, and I put my hand on top of his hand, and I just looked him in the eye, and I growled. I said, I will keep my blanking word. And he looked in my eyes, and he knew that I meant it, and I meant it. I was promising him the protection of the federal government. I was promising him that I would be his sponsor and I would be his benefactor and I would be his protector. And he looked into my soul and he knew I meant it, and he said, okay, I'll give you the names. Learned from him. He told the story, gave us the names, Campisi and Gattuso. Officers went out to their homes immediately to arrest them.
Ken Eto decided to become a witness against the Chicago mob.
"67-year-old Jasper J. Campisi, a reputed mob hitman with a long history of arrests and ties with crime syndicates in Chicago and Kansas City. The other suspect, 47-year-old John Gattuso, is a deputy sheriff and a process server and an operator of syndicate taverns and restaurants. Police say Eto fingered Gattuso as the triggerman in the botched assassination attempt. All three men are said to be controlled by this man, Mob Lieutenant Vincent Solano, the powerful head of Northside gambling and prostitution rackets. Police also questioned another underworld figure, mob boss Joe Arnold, in connection with the Eto shooting, but he was later released. And authorities are looking for reputed mobster Joseph Little Caesar DeVarco for questioning, but they've been unable to locate him.
The Witness Protection Program is run by the Department of Justice. And they set up this program that they would take the witnesses and move them somewhere and give them support so that they could find a new life and live separated from their old life and the people they had testified against. You had to be nominated by a federal prosecutor. You needed to be sponsored by a federal prosecutor and an FBI agent or a DEA agent or whatever investigative agency there was that nominated this witness. And then you were given a psychological test to see if you could comply to the rules of the Witness Protection Program, which were pretty stringent. So let me continue on how that was altered for Eto. The Witness Protection Program taking the test, being formally nominated, being approved, was really all just set aside. Never saw it done for another witness the whole time I was in Chicago, 22 years. Because giving people protection means a security detail for 24 hours a day, very costly. Agents make, $80,000 to $120,000 a year. When I left, you can't have 5 or 6 people guarding one person 24 hours a day for a very long time. But in Eto's case, it was unique and immediately done. And then he was taken to Great Lakes Naval Base, which was on government property, and it was a big hospital. There were agents at the entrance of the hospital, at the entrance to the floor, and at his bedside 24 hours a day. He looked old to me. He had really large bags under his eyes, and his eyes were very hooded. How are you? How are you? How are you feeling? And then I started teasing with, are they treating you the right way? He greeted me very warmly. It was as if we were like friends. It was as if we kind of knew each other before, and he was happy to see me.
He was heavily bandaged. He was very, very bloodied. I saw his boots, and there was blood in his boots. And but When I asked him how he was, he says, fine, I'm fine, you know. First he says, what? He says, I can't hear too well. He says, my hearing is poor right now. Can't hear too well. So I had to shout into his ear, you know. And he says, oh, I'm fine, I'm fine.
We didn't find him lodged in the car, which we thought was sort of weird. So it was a revolver, so the casings wouldn't have shot out. Yeah, no, all of them were lodged in his head, actually, now that I think about it. Oh, and for years, he had fragments in his head. He would say, oh, feel this. And I'd say, I don't want to feel your head. He'd say, no, I want you to feel this. And he'd make me feel his head. And you could literally feel the fragments of in his head. They just rolled under his skin and never penetrated his skull because he angled it sideways, and so the bullets just went around Eto's head.
Johnny Gattuso, the trigger man, fired 2 shots that just went in and out, and then as Ken rolled over and feigned death on the front seat of the car, 1 more shot went on the other side, in and out. Each entry and exit wound were maybe 1.5 inches apart. Nothing penetrated his brain case, nothing penetrated the skull. He had 3 superficial wounds, a terrible headache, a bad concussion, but miraculously, nothing entered his brain.
From the moment the FBI took custody of Eto's car and clothing, we began to build a trail of physical evidence leading to his shooters. Although the Bureau had begun using computers, we still relied on the agent's hard work and ingenuity. We had the physical evidence, and the cops had the car for 2 weeks and had never gone through hairs and fibers. And we just got down and we just scraped all the seats and the rugs, and we got the hairs, both of them. After he was shot and survived, then it was my job to have cases from what he was telling us spin off and make other cases. And the only child that he really talked a lot about was Stevie. And Stevie was the youngest, and I think Stevie was the most spoiled. And I think Stevie, he might have seen himself in Stevie, because I think Stevie was something of a smooth con man himself.
Blaine?
Yes. Are you
How do
Stephen?
you do? I am, yes. How are you?
Hello, Stephen.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to finally meet you also. How have you been?
Oh, good.
Well, my name is Stephen Joseph Eto. I was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1960. My mother was Judith Ann McCain from Kansas, and my father, Ken Eto, from California, Stockton, California. Right after my father was shot, he said, you're going to hear a lot of things. You're going to hear that I'm a rat, that I turned rat. He said, but I just want to let you know I gave them their shot. He said, now it's my turn. And he said, if I go to prison, I'll be dead in a day. If I stay out on the street, I'll be dead in a week. He said, this is the only recourse that they have left me.
He says, and now I know they're gonna hit me.
Right.
And then he starts giving them directions to where to drive. Go here, turn here, turn here. And then he says, wow, no, the deal is sealed when he tells me to turn down this alley.
So Dad, my father was driving.
Yes.
Who was in the? Who was next to him?
Jasper Pesci was sitting in the front seat, and John Gattuso was sitting in the back seat,
Right directly
passenger
behind him?
side.
Oh, passenger side. Okay.
Passenger side.
Okay.
And so Jasper Campisi is giving him the directions, and so he says, pull into this alley here. And your dad's thinking, well, this is sort of weird. Why am I pulling in here? And I think the restaurant's over there.
Right.
Well, this is where they're going to do it. And puts the car in park. And then he says, bang, bang. And he says, I'm not dying.
When they shot me, I could hear bang, clunk, maybe 3-4 times. I don't know how many times they hit me. And I was saying, what the hell is it? I am dying. You know, I'm coming to me. You know, just like, what the hell is this shit? You know. And I don't know right now what happened. But I said, I ain't gonna die the way it felt, and I'm not gonna die, and I'm conscious. I should be conscious, so I start shaking, like me believing that I'm finished, you know. And I fall on the seat, and when I hear bang, bang, I mean the door's closed. That means they're taking off. Well, I give them a little minute to take off, and I got my hand on my head like this, holding the blood in. And when I figured that they are gone, I opened the side of my car and walked the other way to Grand Avenue.
Did you walk down the alley or through a gangway?
Yeah, wherever, that empty lot or wherever. There's blood, gotta be blood all the way down.
Were they following you, another car?
The car was already there, but I don't know, I couldn't recognize it or nothing.
Was that car there after you got shot, or did they take it?
Did you hear that car? I don't know, I got shot.
Did you hear the car start up, or was it running?
Huh?
Your car was parked, right? Did you hear the engine start in the other car?
No, I heard them, they run out of the car, I heard footsteps running, okay? I thought they might be running towards the restaurant over there. I didn't even think about that car over there. In fact, I was laying down in the front seat. So my thoughts were that they ran. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's just in my mind that they slammed the door, and I heard running steps, and I just figured that they were going on that side street that we came in, and I'm really still. I figured, well, it's okay for me to leave, you know. And I found this drugstore, and I told him, hey, I got shot in the head, so he called me an ambulance.
What was the date of the assassination? Do you remember the date?
Yeah. I remember the date like it was my birthday. It's February 10th.
February 10th?
Yeah.
1980...
83.
83.
Well, it goes out over the police who had been shot, and all hell broke loose. I mean, commanders started coming in from all over because this is the first mob hit that anybody has ever survived. And there had been, I think I pulled up a statistic, 1,100 mob hits in the city, and 0 have been solved. He liked playing the odds. Life was always weighed in odds. What are the odds, Elaine? What are these were the odds that I thought. But he absolutely knew. He took a bath. He put on his nice clothes. He gave Mary Lou his life insurance policy. And he went out to the car, and then he sat. He said he sat for 15 minutes, sort of listening to the news and whether he should go, and there was no doubt in his mind. He had to go, and he was going to go. Why didn't you call the FBI? Why didn't you call us? Why didn't you just take the kids and Mary Lou and run away? Why didn't you do something else other than going to what you thought was going to be your assassination? And he said, he was incredibly stoic. I thought bullheaded. I thought stubborn. But he said I had no other choice. I had to go and do it. When Campisi and Cattuso bungled Ken Eto's assassination, it was a severe blow to the Chicago Mafia. Just 4 days later, both bunglers went missing.
That Gattuso and Campisi were doomed if they got out of the Cook County jail on bond. Yet they made bond, walked out of there, and Campisi apparently felt that he told people that he was a friend of so many powerful figures that had done so much for organized crime, they wouldn't want to hurt me. There was no reason why they would do that. And despite the attempts by some people like Mr. Margolis to indicate to them, if you're freed, you walk out, you'd probably be killed because you muffed up the job.
And so then ensued this big all-points bulletin looking for their bodies, because we knew they were going to show up later. And it was 7 days later that out of Jasper Campisi's, the trunk of his car, it had been parked in a suburban parking lot, and it was really very hot during those 7 days. Their bodies, they had been stabbed numerous times and garroted. According to mob lore, when you're garroted, it's you're showing disrespect. And they're saying, Campisi, you are the MAID member, you are the ranking one, and you have messed this up. I often think we didn't do a very good job in trying to flip Cattuso and Campisi when they were out on bail. Do you know that Campisi put up $1.8 million in cash, $1 million cash bond for federal charges, and $800,000 for state charges? And he raised the funds in 3 days. It took Cattuso a little bit longer to raise. His was 1.5. Why did they even want to get out? The bosses gave him that money. Because then we're going to have you out. Then we're going to kill you. He was born in 1919 in the Japanese-American community of Stockton, California. His father, Mamoru Eto, taught physical education and religion in Japan. He had come to the United States to visit the Japanese immigrant community. Outraged by their degenerate behavior, he decided to move to the U.S. to minister to them. A year later, he brought his wife to California. Ken was born as their first son. His father described the birth in his diary. October 19, 7:45 p.m. My wife safely delivers. I am truly grateful, and he is a boy. My joy knows no bounds.
Everyone else was worried. My wife was worried. She's uneasy about me doing what I'm doing now. She didn't want me to participate at all. And I can understand her feelings about that. But here I am. The story is what it is, I don't feel any remorse about it. I think every experience I went through has been a benefit to me. I think it provided me with what I needed for me to make the changes that I feel I had to make, and I did make. In a major operation by the FBI and the Chicago Police Department, supposedly running the biggest numbers rackets of the history of this Chicago. In that that particular event, a newspaper man had misidentified me as being this person. My picture and my name and my company name and my residence were all printed in the papers. And as a consequence, I lost some of my customers. My bank would not, they would not provide me with the funds necessary to run the business. When I did finally appear, it was apparently to cooperate, according to the subpoena, to cooperate with the state in their efforts to, I guess, incriminate my brother. And they asked me to raise my hand to take the oath. I didn't do so. In my opinion, I think they knew what they were doing. I think they were using me as a wedge to get at my brother. So that they had fully, I think, intended to put me in jail to put some pressure on my brother. Yeah. That's my father. He was a school teacher. I think he was teaching at the Kansai Gakuin. He was a rugby coach and kendo instructor. He was sent by his school to come to the United States to further his education so that he could go back to teach at Kansai. He came to California and got religion, and he stayed. He never went back. He says he saw a vision in the farm, on the field. It was that vision, apparently, that made him feel that he had a calling to religion.
539番を持って今朝の礼拝を始めさせていただきます。
My impression was that he was just totally self-contained with that religious set of mind, and that was all he thought about, and that's all he seemed to care about. We lived on a farm, and during the season, of course, he would be working on the farm, but during the winter, I suppose it was, he would leave home and travel around California preaching. My mother was a very highly educated, well-educated woman. I remember she was a good cook. I remember that she had made hot rolls She was able to make country cheese from the milk from the cow that we had. She also made a lot of tsukemono. We enjoyed all of that. I don't remember ever hearing my mother speak. I can't recall the sound of her voice. That was one of maybe the saddest part of the effect that my father had on her. I think she was also of a Buddhist faith, and that probably had a great deal to do with her mental illness, being under the almost forcible lifestyle that my father demanded, and was sent back to Japan by my father and spent the last years of her life in a mental institution in Japan. He was very, very strict. I guess it was sort of like some kind of a Japanese thing. He punished us rather uniquely at times. You know. He used the yaito, some kind of a punk, I guess, for treatment. You know, it was these heat treatments, and if I look real closely, even now, I think I could still see a scar. Maybe it's my imagination, but anyway, it was burned. I was burned so severely that he was kind of shocked by his own, and so that was the last time we were ever punished in that way. All subsequent punishments were conventional spankings, and even he was creative in that. And he would take us alongside the bed and cover us with a blanket, and then he would proceed to whack us. And we didn't know when we were going to get our particular whack, who the culprit was, so that individual usually got the brunt of the punishment. He would get into little fights at school, and he was known in school as a tough Buddha head. They call us Buddha heads at that time, you know. And so he was known as a real tough kid.
He talks about his mother being constantly depressed. I think his mother was actually, he said that she was constantly pregnant and that she was in bed all the time. He never remembers having a mother's warmth or care. He just remembers his religious, zealot, brutal father. So tough, tough, tough life. The United States was then reeling from the Great Depression that began in 1929. At the age of 14, Ken ran away from his father's repressive discipline. He headed north alone.
I don't know what he did. He did all of these without our knowing it, so I can't describe what he had done. Just all we know was that he was gone,
We had workers that had immigrated from many Japanese workers. And so I think that he was picking fruit for some time, maybe a year. And then he went up further north in California and worked in the canneries. But I also think that he was following where they have large groups of migrant workers that play cards at night, and he was becoming more skilled in his trade as a gambler and probably pulling some con games. And what he was just brilliant at was watching people. he could be by himself for literally months on end, just about. And he would just observe people, and he would just think. But all the time, he was scheming. After the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States went to war against Japan. "110,000 Japanese Americans were sent to internment camps. Records indicate Ken was confined to a camp in Minidoka, Idaho. How difficult how incredibly difficult it was to run away at 14. To be Asian, I never realized how difficult it was to be Asian American in America at the time. I never really understood the internment camps. You know, I went to elementary school in the 1950s and in high school in the 60s. America didn't teach us about that. American school children didn't learn about it. It's an embarrassing chapter in the history of in the United States. He immediately is put into a camp. He is immediately segregated because of what he looks like, because of his race. I don't remember segregating Germans or Italians, and we were at war with them. I mean, it was a painful, horrible era in our history. So he grew up with what a horrible child, you know, from 14 until whenever he got out of the internment camp. How terrible, how tough. I never realized how tough it was. Although I was horrified to learn about Ken's internment, he spoke of it laughingly. For him, it was a golden opportunity to gamble 24 hours a day and practice his sleight of hand card tricks. Ken Eto first appeared in Chicago in 1953. In the 1950s and 60s, a variety of Americans flocked to Chicago in search of a new life. They were following their dreams. Ken Eto was one of them. Stephen's mother was another.
My mother ran away from home when she was very young. She lived in Kansas and came to Chicago. And she got a job working at a strip club on Rush Street in Chicago. And in between sets, in between dancing on stage, the dancers were supposed to go through the crowd and to, engage the gentlemen that were in the club and hopefully get them to buy drinks. And they would get a commission on that. They'd keep their stir stick, and then they'd get commissions on the drinks that they sold throughout the course of the evening. So she was in between sets and was working the crowd, and she saw this Asian guy at the corner of the bar, and she went up and started hustling him they called it B drinks. So she started hustling him for B drinks. And he actually got her to buy her a bottle of champagne, and then evidently 9 months later I was born. And it turned out that Asian guy was my father.
Joe's apartment building, which was right here at 21 East Chestnut. He lived there for many years. One of the nicer places that he lived. High rise. And all up and down here were really like go-go places, bars, all sorts of places to drink and play cards in the back room. And anything that was here was controlled by the outfit. You didn't do business in this area unless you paid for the outfit. That meant the union guys. That meant you got your towels from outfit businesses. You got your uniforms. Everything was controlled by the mob or the syndicate.
I used to have, I used to keep a box where I would cut out the articles about my father. One of them that stands out in my mind was that it just described what he did, the fact that he ran the Bolita, which was, I believe, it's a Latin numbers game, kind of based on the lottery. And I remember a passage in the article that said he was an organizational genius.
This is an apartment that my dad lived in for a couple years. And then right next door over here was a place called Karsten's. It was a coffee shop. And so he would have a lot of meetings here at Karsten's. And we'd sit in a booth, he'd get down here, and we'd spend a half a day just sitting here at Karsten's. And there would be a succession of guys that would come in and sit down, have a cup of coffee, and invariably an envelope would come out of my dad's pocket and they'd get slid underneath the table. And the guy on the other side of the table would take it and put it away. And I guess that was the payoffs, you know, that he was making.
I remember that when I was growing up, I was the only Asian, half Asian, in a school that was predominantly Italian, and so I would get picked on quite a bit. I would get beaten up a lot. And I went to my dad one day, and I had just gotten beaten up, and you know, he told me, he said, you know, wipe your eyes, quit crying. He says, you know, take care of it. You know, he said, as long as you allow them to do that to you, you'll always be a victim. He says, you have to stand up for yourself. So, all right, so the next day I went to school, I took a corkscrew with me. They opened up a bottle of wine, and it was the old kind that had a wooden handle, and then a metal piece that came down with the corkscrew on the end. Tucked that into my pants pocket. So on the way home from school that day, of course, my main antagonist came up behind me and knocked my books out of my hands. I went down to pick him up, and he pushed me over. So when I got up, I pulled this corkscrew out, and I hit him in the arm. So when I hit him in the arm, the tines cut some of his muscle. We pulled it out, and there was blood dripping off the corkscrew. And he looked at his arm, and he looked at me, and his eyes got real big, and off he went. You know, he went running away. A couple hours later, I'm at home, and you get a knock on the door. It's the Chicago police. And so my mother called my father. You know, they were divorced at the time, but he came and talked to the cops. After that, he sat me down and he said, if you ever use a weapon on somebody, he said, make sure you kill him. He says, if you kill him, I'll get you off. He said, but if you don't kill him, you're gonna have an enemy for the rest of your life. So that was another one of the things that I remember my father telling me. My mother actually committed suicide when I was, I believe, 21 or 22 years old. She had a drinking problem, and I think that with my mother, she never felt that she lived up to her own expectations of herself. And I think she was still in her 30s. I don't think she was 40 yet when she died. But she went into the garage one night and turned on the car, and carbon monoxide poisoning.
He called me. A very strange phone call that I received one day. He ran down all the name of my brothers and sisters, and I said, yeah. He said, do you know who this is? I said, no. And he said, this is your brother. It's your brother Ken. So we arranged to meet at one of the taverns. Sat down at the bar and had a beer and waited around. And I was watching the door. And this little short guy comes walking through the door. I said, no, that's not him. Because I remember when I was a kid, of course, he was taller than I was. And then I looked, and he looked, and then our eyes met, and it was confirmed that he was the guy. And I said, man, I was looking for somebody tall. So we sat down and we had our conversation. During the course of a conversation, his wife came in. Of course, I didn't know it was his wife. Wife came in and giving him holy hell for not providing her with, I don't know, milk money or something. He had kids at the time, young kids. And in between that tirade, while she was in that tirade, he introduced me to her. This was 1948, I think it was.
You know, back in the 1970s, I worked at the Aladdin Hotel, and it was reputed to have underworld affiliations, mob affiliations. And we used to bring in gamblers from all over the country, and one place was Chicago. And I used to do a magic act then, sleight of hand tricks and some gambling tricks. And one night I got called to a restaurant to meet a fellow who they introduced as Joe Tanaka. You know, I'm trying to remember back that far. He was very, very personable, seemed like a very nice fellow, very interested in the gambling. He liked the magic tricks, but he was very interested in the gambling secrets and the gambling tricks. And at first, I did not want to share those secrets with a stranger. And then one of the fellows who brought in the players from Chicago brought me aside and said, his real name is not Joe Tanaka, he's Ken Eto, and you should show him what he wants to see. Then I knew that he was somebody special. And then I showed him some things about three-card Monte and talked about cheating and some various ways to mark playing cards for cheating. One of the other methods that cheaters use and that private cheaters, including Ken, used was a false deal. Now, the ace of spades, as you notice, is on top of the pack. And they know that because the card is marked, or because in previous rounds of play they keep the ace there and they control the card, even though it looks as though they're shuffling. They've kept the ace or whatever card they want on the top, see? And now, let's suppose I were going to deal that card, but I don't want to deal it to the honest player. I hold it for myself, or I hold it for my partner, and you'll notice that I'm not dealing the ace from the top of the deck. Even though it looks as though the ace is coming from the top, it never leaves the top of the deck. Another method for marking cards in advance of play is known as luminous readers, and it's accomplished by lightly painting a green or violet ink on the back of the playing card. So light, in fact, that the human eye cannot see it, but when the cheaters wear special red glasses or sunglasses, they can see the mark on the back of the card. So as not to create suspicion by wearing red sunglasses, the cheaters have devised a clever method, which is to use one red contact lens. Cards, please. Nice, you got two pair here. You got two pair. He's got a flush. He's got, no, he's not a flush. He's got a flush. You got 9s and 10s, he's got 10s and 4s. You got double.
Ken could play cards like nobody else. He spent a lifetime perfecting his ability to play and cheated them. He had a face that could hide any emotion and the guts to scam anyone that sat down to play against him.
cost you everything.
I know him as Joe the Jap we first met him at, but I know his real name was Ken Eto later. I worked for him for about 2 to 3 years because he was a new kid on the block. And matter of fact, there was never a Japanese in the syndicate. So that was unique in itself. And the power he had is when you could have somebody killed, you're powerful. He would tip $100 to a bartender at a bar. And we're talking about in the 50s, that was big money. But now you're looking at a man that's making $200,000 a week, and he wound up with probably out of the $200,000 for his end, he probably got $25,000, which ain't a bad payday for a week. But that's, you know, when you do $1.2 million a year without paying taxes, you're doing $4 million. But he also was one of the best womanizers I've ever seen in my life. He was a perfectionist with a woman, because what he did is if he liked them but they had some defects, he'd correct them. New nose, new bust. He was putting bust on women before it was in fashion. I mean, he went that far.
The next time I saw Ken was in December of 1999. As compensation for his 17 years in the Witness Protection Program, I was able to deliver $250,000 to him. Shortly after that, he left the program and began living peacefully in Hawaii. He had plenty of time for fishing, his beloved pastime. He met his friends at McDonald's for coffee each morning. When I kidded him, "Why don't you go to Starbucks?" he replied, "That's too expensive. I like the coffee at McDonald's." He went by the name Joe Tanaka. He was living a very modest life. During his 17 years in the Witness Protection Program, Ken Eto provided an astonishing volume of invaluable testimony.
Well, as soon as I parked, bang! I got shot in the head, and I thought, well, I knew it. Second time, I got shot, and I thought, wow, it's not taking an effect. So the third time, when it happened like the first and the second shot, I thought I better play dead. So I put up my hand like that and lay down on the seat. I heard the door slam shut. I heard feet running away.
Who do you believe ordered the hit on you, Mr. Eto?
Vincent Solano.
Would Mr. Solano have had to receive permission to do this hit?
Yes.
From who?
Either Joey Haupa or Jackie Cerrone.
On the advice of my lawyer, I respectfully refuse to answer that question, as my truthful answer may tend to incriminate me.
Did you ever wonder, Mr. Solano, in the beginning of February 1983, whether or not because of this federal charge that Ken Eto might testify and cooperate against you?
Is Mr. Solano your boss in the outfit?
Yes, he is.
How would you get in touch with him to arrange meetings?
I would call Local 1 and identify myself as the pizza man and ask for Vince.
Would he answer generally?
Yes, he would.
I sometimes wonder if America will ever realize just how much we gained from Ken Eto. Well, we'll first start with John Cattuso and Jasper Campisi that had tried to kill him and failed. But with that, he was able to implicate Vince Solano, who was a boss of a crew. The city of Chicago is divided into areas: North Side crew, South Side crew, West Side crew. Vince Solano had the North Side crew. So he implicated Vince Solano in the conspiracy to commit murder, along with Joseph Arnold and Cesar DeVarco. Both made members. Vince Solano's a made member. So he was able to implicate 6 people in his attempted murder. Vince Solano was the president of the local laborers union. The president of the local laborers union. And then probably, I think, one of the most significant trials that he testified in was the case for the skim money from Las Vegas, and that was Joseph Ayupa was convicted in that, who was the capo di capo, the boss. The testimony that Joe gave for the President's Commission on Organized Crime dealt with labor, and because of that, he proved that the labor unions were totally involved and controlled by the mob. Next came, I think, probably one of the most significant police corruption cases, and that was against William Hanhart. William Hanhart was the chief of detectives at the time that Eto was shot. William Hanhart was paid off and controlled by the mob. John Gattuso and Jasper Campisi attempted to murder Joe. They went missing, but it was William Hanhart that called the FBI to find out if we knew where these 2 people were. It was just a complete setup. And so one of the significant things that Joe did for us was that he really was able to define the close relationship between the mob and politicians. I think the corruption of George Ryan when he was Secretary of State, where he sold licenses, and then he subsequently becomes elected the governor. No, your governor of a state is for sale. He is literally for sale, and literally the mob has George Ryan and has contributed and has bribed him.
Deep and long, unholy relationship between the Chicago mob and organized labor, the Chicago mob and various politicians, the Chicago mob and various corrupt police officers. Ken was able to provide help and assistance and information in that regard. And you get a methodological information about the systems and the techniques and the tactics that the mob uses, either to function as a business, to protect itself, to enforce its will. And that kind of background understanding of how this large criminal organization works adds a value that is really way beyond just crime A and crime B, defendant A, defendant B.
My brother was known, even in the mob, as I understand it, for being a genius in organization. He somehow was able to say, this person is disorganized, that person is, pretty good, whatever the case may be. So he was astute in that way.
Ken Eto had developed prostate cancer. I'm surmising it was shortly thereafter he left and moved to Atlanta.
Joe Tanaka. He always by himself.
Me llevaba ahí con sus amigos a arreglar los carros, un mecánico.
And then he started telling him his friends, the mechanic thing. They used to take his truck and fix it there. We asked him if he wants to come and eat, or he was fixing the car in our apartment. We used to tell him, it was time to eat or something. So he used to come inside and eat. When he used to go eat with him, or fish, or sit over there and buy the donuts and eat on his office. Eat coffee and donuts. He sits there and read the newspaper about 3 to 4 hours, looking at the cars, or wherever he used to be, he used to always remember and syndicate something. Stuffed animal with a car or something. Candies, But he used to, he always remembered them. He never did like take pictures until that day with my daughter. Just after my daughter's 15th birthday, that's it. That was the only picture we got from him.
His cancer was advanced.
So after the hospital, we took him. He stayed there about probably 3 days, and then he didn't want to come home. He wanted to go to the hospice and stay over there. Say it was time for him to leave, but he wanted to die there. So that's why he went to. He decided himself that he wanted to be there. He just told us to sign the papers that he wanted to go over there. So every day, mornings or in the afternoon, he used to go. The 2 days that he went in there first times, he used to give him ice cream or something because he said like he was kind of thirsty. But then after that, he didn't want to eat nothing. 3 or 4 days before he died, he didn't want no medicine. He didn't want nothing. He just wanted people to leave him alone.
He was very, very smart in many ways of the world, it seems. He had a very, very easy, pleasant smile. I think he was a likable person who had perhaps a very fearful part of him that I'm not aware of fully anyway, other than the fact that he used to ijimeru me all my younger life, and the fact that he was willing to say to me that he'd have to shoot me if I didn't cooperate with the system. So, other than that, I thought he was a very, let's say, very expansive personality. He's a person that I enjoyed being with. I don't know how it might have been if I had extended relationship with him, but the little brief moments we had were always very pleasant and, in a way, exciting. I liked him. He seemed like he wanted to gain entry back into the family circle.
You know, when we would prepare your father for testimony, and I made a statement in the book that he never, ever changed his story to the prosecutors, to myself, to any agents, never, over 17 years. Now, this is phenomenal. This is phenomenal.
situation is you're clearly not here. And I said, hey,